Hello and welcome to Simply Tax. Now, normally this time of year, we would be welcoming in the familiar sounds of rustling paper and shuffling feet as students and teachers alike get back to the classroom. But many, including my pair of kindergartners who are learning from the living room, right now in fact, are finding themselves in a much different environment this year, as we discussed in episode 106 when we took a look at campus recruiting in a virtual world amid a pandemic. And of course, the current situation has many tax professionals like me working hard towards the impending tax deadlines to wrap up returns in a virtual world as well. But a tax season and classroom not normal doesn't have to prevent us from learning from our guest today on why you should consider, study, and work in tax, and perhaps more importantly, how to have a successful career in tax, even in a remote tax world. I'm excited to share with you on the podcast today a conversation I had with Kent Klaus, a senior instructor at DePaul University, who shares his perspective from a vantage point of both teaching in tax and a 40-year career in public accounting. All right, it's time for class to begin. Let's kick things off by hearing how Professor Klaus came to teach about tax in the first place.
My story in terms of teaching at DePaul goes back many years. I was in public accounting almost 40 years when I retired. And as a manager at Arthur Andersen, which was the firm I was at before Deloitte, I worked for an international tax partner who also taught in the MST program at DePaul. He was one of the instructors, adjunct faculty there. And from time to time, he would be called away on business. And so he would ask me to step in to teach that particular class for him. And so I did that over a couple of year period where I would just do maybe one class a quarter to cover for him. And at first I wasn't sure if I enjoyed it. I was very nervous. It was stressful to fill a 3-hour class, to think that you knew enough to fill a 3-hour class. But over a 2-year period, I found that I really enjoyed doing it. And I think I got more comfortable being in a position where I was teaching a graduate level class. So I let DePaul know that if there was an opportunity to have my own class, I'd love to do that. And a couple of years after that, some of the accounting principal classes came up where they had adjunct faculty that had retired. And so I started teaching my own accounting and tax classes at DePaul as an adjunct, and then did that on and off for 30 years or so. And then in the last 5 or 6 years, DePaul launched a career class for accounting students. And I was very interested in being part of that. So I came back as an adjunct to teach the career class, and then some tax classes opened, and then I retired and started teaching full time. And since I'm a tax guy as background, I naturally gravitated towards the tax classes for undergraduate students. It was a long process to get to this point where I'm doing it on a full-time basis now.
You know, obviously there was some intentionality to it, but it was almost kind of seizing an opportunity, because I'll bet the first time you had that opportunity and that partner came to you was probably a little bit of a, like you said, 3 hours. I have to fill that and do what? Was it a natural yes, or did you kind of have to go out on a limb a little bit to do that first class?
It was not a natural yes in terms of my jumping at the opportunity, but it was a partner I worked pretty closely for. And it was, let's just put it this way, it was put to me in a way where I didn't think I had an option to say no at that first stage, right?
Uh-huh.
And so I did it on the basis that he had asked me to do it. And actually, after that first time, I thought he would never ask me again. It was a struggle to fill that 3-hour period, but he had enough faith in me to ask me to do it again. And at that point, it became a personal challenge to want to get better at it. I used that second opportunity as a way to kind of address the things that I didn't do well the first time around. And after that, it was more smooth sailing. So I often use, even though that's not your question, I often use that experience as kind of a mentoring experience, because in some ways the partner had a better idea of what I might like than maybe I did myself. And so pushed me a little bit to do something that was out of my comfort zone.
Mentors have played a similar role in my career, and I can't say enough about that and the power of finding a good mentor and so forth. But I am curious here, and I know we've had a few opportunities to talk together, and I know that obviously based on your career and that you teach in it, and obviously I'm biased as well in this way that we think a career in tax is a great thing. To maybe an understatement to say that. Why do you think, and why do you encourage students to more seriously think about a career in tax?
For me, again, this was a bit of an aha moment when I was at DePaul in my junior and senior year. I actually worked for two public accounting firms, a small firm and a medium-sized firm. At the small firm, they were more focused on individual and small business tax work. And so I did a fair amount of that. At the medium sized firm, I did other things like audits and things of that nature. And so when it came time to apply for a full time job, just based on that very limited experience, I decided to go the tax route just because the engagement with clients that I had in college was a more deeper experience than I expected. But I had no idea what that meant. I just did it based on that limited information. But what I found after landing, so my first job out of college was with Arthur Andersen. And what I found is that there were so many options for a tax career there that I had no idea about when I was thinking of what I was going to do next. They had a group that focused on wealthy families and family tax planning. They had a group that focused on estate and individual financial planning. They had a group that focused on small businesses. They had a group that focused on large corporations, partnerships, more options than you can count with your fingers. And suddenly it struck me that your career could go in so many different directions. That was just on the public accounting side. And as I got to know my clients over the next 2, 3, 4 years, I discovered that those same options for tax careers existed in industry as well, in that there was so many different ways that you could be successful. And a lot of times the success was dependent on not just a technical knowledge of the information, but also your comfort and enjoyment with being around clients and providing that personal business or personal tax advice. You could find all the different career options that kind of fit the particular way that you wanted to conduct yourself and build a career in a way that you actually enjoyed getting out of bed every morning because you love what you were doing.
Talk about the mentors. I had an early mentor that would talk about how he was, I guess, so appreciative to feel that he had, landed in a career and a profession, and he was a tax partner that, he was excited to come to work every day and do that. But maybe as a quick question of, your time at Arthur Andersen and Deloitte, what was the area of tax that you did land on and practice in primarily?
So the last 20 years of my career was focused largely on what we called the global employer services practice, which actually blended all the things that I loved about a tax career. It gave me the opportunity to work with the corporate level representatives on ways to structure international assignments and international transfers to be effective for the corporation. It gave me a chance to work with the corporate human resource people to understand some of the non-tax issues that they had to manage. And then most importantly, the thing that was a common denominator throughout my time in public accounting, it gave me the one-on-one time with the individual clients, in this case, the employees that were going on international assignment and some of the tax and financial issues that they had to deal with, and having a chance to help them make the right decision for themselves and their family. That for me has been an overriding element of why tax has been such a wonderful career for me, is that engagement with individuals that you feel like after the conversation or after the project that you really made a difference to them in the decisions that they had to make.
I like what you said there kind of earlier about the fact that there are so many different directions and kind of finding what that is. And it can almost be overwhelming. When I was a student and I was studying, I had no idea of the possibilities that or really ahead in a career in tax or accounting, even for that matter, to be honest.
Yeah, no, and I think what was great about the opportunity within public accounting and also industry is you have a chance to experiment a bit. And so I had a chance before I settled on the area that I finished my career in to do financial planning, to do corporate tax planning, to work with wealthy families in the Chicago area, and to kind of delve into the tax and related topics that were of interest to those types of clients. And throughout my career, I never felt like I ever had a time where I wasn't learning myself. For many of us, I think that's motivating as well. The fact that you're never in a position where your role is getting stale, that you're always learning something new.
That's a big part of what I enjoy about what I do, honestly, is the constant learning and never stale, right? Like you said, it can sometimes also be a stressful part of it, but it's a good stress, I guess I'll say, the way I look at it, because it's kind of beats the alternative in my mind of kind of getting stale, to use your word.
Just in terms of a final thought about why students might find a tax career particularly helpful or useful is that you can become a subject matter expert pretty early in your career. I mean, because the area of tax consulting and tax compliance is so broad, and there's so many different niches that are available. Once you kind of claim your ground, you can become an expert at it pretty quickly out of college. Not that you have to make a career around that, but just having that sense that you're an expert at something just helps your self-confidence as well.
And maybe to your point about the fact that it's ever changing, and even in this environment that we're in right now, we've seen a lot of legislation, COVID-19 related relief and legislation, but there's a lot of tax pieces in there. And this is something actually one of our guests, Tony Nitty, was on after 2017 tax reform and made this comment of, now's your time that, you can be the expert on this new provision or this new credit or whatever it is, because it's entirely new. Whenever you deal with new provisions, you as the new person know it just as much as the person that has 40 years in the career. That is rewarding, and also a chance to get some wins there, like to your point.
Exactly. I was about 4 years into my career when the 1986 Tax Act passed. So I'm already aging myself here. And that had huge changes to the tax code. And suddenly everybody's learning it for the first time. And 4 years into my career, I was able to claim a certain area of the code before others did and become an expert not only in the Chicago office, but across the U.S. firm. I won't say what the niche was. It's probably not one that would appeal to many, but it was a way to start that path down expertise that I think makes a career in accounting so much more rewarding.
What a great experience. Yeah, you talk about just how the circumstances shaped that, right? And I'm sure it took a little bit of like you said, experimenting, searching around to find that, but also maybe some discipline perhaps on your end just to kind of dig in and do that. How did you go about doing that? What was the path, I guess, that you went down to be able to get there?
Well, I think it was again good mentoring. Having people that see opportunities and then putting those in front of you. And again, the decision is always yours to make whether you want to invest your time to do that. Similar to my story about teaching, another partner had presented me with a project involving this particular area. It had to do with interest expense and interest tracing, just to give you a little more background on that. And once I delved into the project, I discovered there wasn't anyone else in the firm that was pursuing that particular area. And yet there was a lot of questions coming in about that. I love the idea of being on the receiving end of phone calls and feeling like, people were actually calling me because I knew something that they didn't want to spend the time to research on their own. And again, that just good mentoring really led me down that path.
I can't say enough about the impact that mentors have had on my career. And I'll again say that in many cases, it wasn't always necessarily an intentional part on my part of finding the mentor. There have definitely been times where I've sought them out, and I think there's a process and something to be said for doing that. But oftentimes the most impactful, it's sort of proceeded that way, and a lot of credit goes to that mentor and really giving me some guidance that kind of led me down my road.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of commencement speeches, that have been given over time at different universities. And there was one by Stephen Colbert about 10 or 12 years ago. And he had this classic line to the graduates of the college at the time was always say yes. And I think that was a way of in all of my mentoring experiences where I was the protege and somebody else was the mentor, trusting that what you're being asked to do is going to be in your best interest is a huge leap of faith, right? But it generally doesn't disappoint you. I mean, you always find that people are generally trying to help you develop. And this idea of saying yes when the opportunity presents itself, I think has paid off time and time again, certainly in my career.
I wouldn't have necessarily thought of it that way of the saying yes in those situations, but that's absolutely what it is. I mean, it even led to the fact that I'm hosting this podcast and talking to you right now.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. It's an honor to do that for sure.
The pleasure's mine. And I know we were even, the conversation that even kind of preceded it is we're in this environment now and kind of teaching in the middle of that and also trying to drive a lot of interest around the area that we're both passionate about, right? Tax. And so just kind of getting your insight, sharing that and getting that perspective, I thought would be something that I know the listeners of the podcast are very interested in, but sounds like your students are as well, I would imagine.
What's really neat about the current environment with a lot of classes being online and virtual, not just at DePaul where I teach, but at almost every university in the country, is that it gives you a chance to expose the students to lots of different types of content. And one of the things that I've discovered are podcasts like the ones you do, where through your interviews, the student can understand a little bit more about how people have navigated the world of tax. And if you just look at the list of podcasts that you've done, I think you represent pretty well all of the different career paths that I mentioned in answering your earlier question.
It's definitely something I have a passion for, I guess I'll say, and then I've kind of followed that and just trying to help with that because I know that speaking from my own personal experience, I really didn't have all that much of an intentional plan. I'll admit that kind of led me down the road that I'm on. Don't want to sound like it was completely unintentional, but there were definitely some things that I didn't know going in, and so I think I'm always kind of curious and like to share them, and that's sort of a guiding principle I use when we're having some of the conversations that we share on the podcast. Because I look at it as, well, gosh, when I was in those shoes, if it's something that I would have liked to have known then and heard more about, and I consider myself very fortunate to be able to do this and have some of the conversations that I've had with some of the really great tax minds. It basically all comes down to that: is how can we solve some of those questions and get some of that insight shared.
If you don't mind, I'll turn the table for a few minutes here because I do plan, once this podcast is ready, to share it with my students in the fall. And one of the things that I've been doing is interviewing for my class people that have had a successful career in accounting, whether it's tax or some other branch of accounting. And I know the students would love to hear a little bit about how you ended up doing what you're doing. You know, you've asked me that question, Damien, but how did you end up in a tax career?
Happy to kind of share that because, again, like I said, it's my personal one wasn't necessarily a straight line. Maybe I'll back to when I was in school and going through that. I actually was born and raised in Northern California, went to UC Berkeley as an undergrad, and my undergraduate studies were actually in music. Had a passion there, still have a passion there, but I knew that I also had a passion for. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew it's in business maybe. So I kind of started down that road, and then I really liked the kind of the intro, the overview class that we took, like the 101 class. Maybe I don't know what the number was, but that sort of a class where you kind of get a little taste of everything. I really liked the accounting section, and it just made sense. And I liked the tax stuff even more, perhaps. And so started down that road, kind of at the time of really the kind of the turning point was just identifying, okay, I'm kind of interested in this, and it just sort of makes sense to me. I do recall some of my friends at the time kind of looking at me like, wait, this is the stuff you like? We don't like this stuff. And so for whatever that's worth, but I enjoyed it. There's a lot of problem solving that I could see that I enjoyed. Again, something that I like. So I've generally, my path and the one that really led me to choose a career path in accounting and then to drill down into tax and then to drill down into public accounting was just following the things that I was interested in. I did take that interest and said, okay, well, I'll get an internship experience. And I started with, it was a very small firm, just to kind of get that experience. And then I took a second internship, which was actually at the firm I started with out of school. And I started a good portion of my first part of my career with them. It was a large local firm. Got a lot of different experience. And I was, again, very passionate and interested in tax, but also had an opportunity in that experience to work on the audit side as well, which I generally, my advice to students is if you're thinking about a career in accounting period, great job. If you're, I'm gonna lead you down the tax road because I am interested in clearly biased there. But I will say that my experience on the auditing side was very important and has paid huge dividends for me down the road, even as a tax professional, to be able to have that experience. And then kind of continued from there, just following a little bit of opportunity from mentors to your point earlier about the just say yes, when they would come along and somebody had left the firm, for example, was a senior manager and sort of opened up this opportunity that was a big stretch project for me to do. I can remember just thinking, wait, you want me to do this? Are you sure? Like, I don't feel like I'm the one, or there's gotta be somebody else, but I just said yes and, buckled down and got it done and learned a whole lot in the process and asked a whole lot of questions along the way. And then I've kind of just continued that approach. And I don't want to say it was completely by lack of planning, but it was sort of something that I just sort of fell into by following the things that I was most interested in.
Given what you've just said, what advice would you have for a student today who's thinking about a career in accounting, but doesn't necessarily know what direction to go?
That's a really, I think, an important question, to ask yourself. And it's maybe my first advice, because I feel like all too often, maybe it's a little bit of kind of how I'm wired. I'm a bit of a driven guy, and kind of always almost kind of like leaning forward to the next thing. Sometimes with that, you don't pause and kind of do that moment of introspection of, what do I really like? What do I really want to do? And I think that's an important thing, and just paying attention to what it is. But I think if I was going to give one real piece of advice, and okay, maybe what I just said kind of ties into this, but it's just asking questions and finding out more, having a learning mindset. I mean, you're in school, you're studying now. If you can get that down in the concept of learning, and I think even in this environment that we're in now, in terms of just the pace of change and innovation and all that's been coming down the pipeline, outside of some of the challenges that directly come from the pandemic that we're in now, and accelerating some of those things, perhaps. I think that learning and then unlearning what you learned and relearning something new is really going to be an important skill. So I think just having that learning mindset is the advice I would give, because whenever I've done that, it has served me very well. It's not always easy to do, particularly if you're going down the road of accounting. There's one common trait I found from a lot of accountants, and perhaps especially the tax ones, like to know the answers and like to help people. Going back to kind of what you said at the beginning there, that drive and want to help people sometimes comes with it a drive to also have an answer for something. And it's not possible, I'll just say, especially anymore. And you talked about some of the changes with the 1986 tax reform and the changes there, and some of the changes that have happened since then. I mean, it's just not possible to know it all. And even if it was, there's going to be a time you're gonna make a misstep. I had a mentor that always kind of told me that if it's whenever you get too comfortable and you think you know the answer, that's when, particularly in tax, you're going to make a mistake. Because if you get a little overconfident, that's not a good place to be, because there is a lot to learn, a lot to think about. And again, I think that's that keeps it exciting. So again, kind of boiling it down, it's just keeping that learning mindset throughout your entire career. I've done that so far, plan to keep doing it, and have to remind myself sometimes, because like I said, you can get distracted with thinking you know something, but it's kind of as simple as that, I guess I would say.
Well, and you said something that I hope those students of mine that would be listening to this will take heart, is even though you ultimately ended up in a career in tax, you did work in other parts of our business, including on the audit side. And one of the things that I heard you say was you got something out of that experience as well. And I think part of my kind of gravitating and ultimately settling on a career in tax was that I saw the full cycle of what we do. And I think a lot of times when I've talked to people that gave up on that, they didn't stick around long enough to see that. And what I mean is the cycle starts with you identifying the issue, giving advice, implementing that advice, and then seeing the result of that of that implementation, right? And sometimes that can be a year or 2 or 3 years before you see that full cycle. And when the results come in, you feel so good for what you've done. And I think that part of what I would hope students would do, regardless of what route they take, is see things through to the end. Careers are very long. I mean, in my case, as I said, 40 years. You can have a lot of different journeys along the way where you get to see the whole cycle of the activity, and you can make some decisions about what's right for you.
I agree that the marathon outlook on the career is one. Again, I have to remind myself, and it's at times, right? I mean, even though I'll always give that advice, but I mean, sometimes the most simple and the best advice is not necessarily easy to implement and do, and it is taking that pause and making sure that you're doing that. But there is an element that's, no doubt there's some hard work in there. I guess as the saying always goes, right? And anything that's worth doing is going to take some hard work, and I think that is true. But it does pay off, especially in those moments of time where you're just feeling like, oh man, I don't think I can't hang with this. Thinking from my own personal experience, those are the moments where it just took hanging on a little bit longer that I could actually see the bigger picture, to your point, or the next opportunity presented itself and it took a different turn, or I learned something new about myself. I think that's the most important thing is even when, they kind of use the metaphor of driving down the highway and you're speeding along and you skip the pit stop or something, the tires are flying off because you're going so fast and you're pushing yourself so hard. Sometimes you'll learn a lot by doing that. Not that I would suggest anybody do that, but I will tell you that I put myself down that road one time of pushing myself way too far, and I learned a lot about myself and how I should approach things from doing that. If I was going to have one piece of advice to add on to it, I guess I would probably say, take the advice of those that have done it, and you don't have to experience all of it to do that. But there is definitely some hard work, and don't give up when the going gets tough.
I have to ask you, Damien, I know many of the students listening to this would say, so how does somebody with a career in tax end up doing all these podcasts that you're doing? How did that happen?
That's a great question. And I will tell you that if we go back, I'll just say 5 years, and you told me that we'd be having this conversation now and that I'd be hosting a podcast about taxes, I think I would almost laugh because it hadn't really occurred to me. But it really, if again, this maybe boils down to a piece of advice of kind of that saying yes, but also your approach that you took to the 1986 tax reform, right? Was you kind of found a gap, you found a pothole, and you filled it. And that's really what led me to the podcast. We started internally, really, as an internal opportunity for those at BKD to learn about and kind of continue to grow as tax professionals, just because there is so much to learn. And I'd suggested to our tax leadership when we're having a conversation about the challenges of keeping up, because it is challenging, but again, rewarding, and also what makes it interesting, in my opinion, that you always have something more to learn, always something new coming down the pipeline. But with that comes, well, how are you going to do it? And the challenges there, if you're going to read, and everybody has their different methods of learning, right? And kind of what works best for them. And I'd kind of thrown out the idea of, maybe a podcast. That might be an opportunity or a way to look at, and to be completely honest, and it turned into you should do that. And so that's sort of where it evolved. So again, there was a pothole. I saw that, and they got the ask to do it, and thought, oh, okay, I can try to figure that out and do it. And it sort of led on from there. I mean, definitely there's been a lot of work. It's something I'm very passionate about. So the fact that I'm passionate about it and the passion drives it makes the work easy work. It took a lot of getting outside of the comfort zone, kind of like that first class you did, recorded a few of them, and I was like, wow, that's not very good. What am I going to need to do to get better at this? And just took a constant approach to try to improve and get better. And back to my advice earlier, I guess, that keeping that learning mindset and just approaching it as, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure it out.
I think you also said something that is really, really important, whether you go into tax or some other area of accounting, is to survey the landscape around you, as you did. You use the term pothole, you can use the term opportunity, but to look for things that no one else is doing and raise your hand and try and put a stake in the ground that's something that, number one, should be done, as in the case of the podcast. And number two, that you're willing to be the person that does it. I think the area of tax, certainly there's lots of opportunities to do that. There's so many rules and regulations at the federal, state, international level that you can survey. And if you're convinced that there's something that isn't being addressed, that needs to be addressed, then own it. And you could build, the next couple of years of your career around that, and potentially see if that's something that you want to use as a stepping stone to bigger and better things for yourself.
Some of the groundwork that I had probably done leading into it, because that's another common question I get, is saying, okay, well, yeah, you had the opportunity you found the opportunity and there's a pothole there and you filled it. Okay. But how did you just do that? And a lot of the groundwork I'd say I laid was really with saying yes to opportunities to present early on, and doing that in a safer environment. Some of my early presenting, and a lot of the presenting I still do, is with the Illinois CPA Society. I did a lot there in some of the other societies and the AICPA. And I think you start in kind of a safe environment like that. If you got other tax professionals in there. I mean, at the same time, I will admit that sometimes those even to this day will intimidate me more than others, because I'm thinking, man, there's some smarter people in here than me, and they're going to know I don't know this topic or something, even though I've prepared for it. But in reality, when you're dealing with those situations where, even if it's within a firm, or you're working in industry and you're working within your corporate group, and there's an opportunity to embrace something, there's this new change and you want to teach people on it, do it, and get feedback from people, ask for it. What can I do to be better at it? Listen to yourself. That is probably the hardest thing. I still, to this day, even though I host a podcast, I don't particularly like listening to myself. So that's been an interesting side effect, is hosting a podcast. You do listen to yourself quite a bit, but you do learn a lot about that by listening to yourself or watching yourself on video. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. But again, trying to stretch a bit, and but doing it, walk before you run, sort of thing. You don't have to go out and make it this big, complex, elaborate thing right out of the gate. Just get some easy wins and just start doing it.
One last question, just from my perspective, given where you are in your career and being in a position where you're meeting a lot of clients, you're meeting a lot of people through your podcast. If I'm a student today, what kind of focus should I have on technology? How important is that across the tax domain, if you will?
I think it's hugely important. Even coming into the profession, in the amount of time that I've been in it, things have changed dramatically and quickly. And I think change is kind of a constant thing that we're always dealing with. Actually, I had to one of our recent episodes here, 104 and 105, we had a conversation with a project manager and an innovation leader about change and how to do that. And the quote that one of the guests, Gary Farah, said was, "Change is sort of the only constant that we have anymore," and it's absolutely correct. So to your question, I think you want to embrace it. Quite honestly, as a student, you have a leg up, right? Because it's new to everybody, but because it's new to you, you don't have as much of the forgetting the old and learning the new. You've been using it. You've been thrown right into it, right? Versus having to kind of like gradually get into it. But a few things. One, I don't think I could have known how much Excel was going to be a part of my everyday life when I was a student. I use Excel a whole lot, and not that that's groundbreaking technology, but there is certainly a lot that you can learn about Excel that I'll say, even I look at myself and think, gosh, I could do more, because I know this program can do a lot more for me than it does. So if you have an opportunity to get advanced skills there as a student, that will only help you down the road. But even just looking at how things have evolved on, you look at the individual process and even our individual process, we're using technology now that reads the numbers and imports it into the tax software, and it's becoming incredibly effective. And actually, I had a conversation with a guy that had developed SurePrep, is the company, and Tax Caddy that they use to kind of help facilitate that. One of our earlier episodes, and kind of how he came about that. But in the future, he envisions. But I think that's going to continue forward, that sort of thing. And when you just look at things, process automation, advances in artificial intelligence, those sorts of things, it's going to change the landscape of the profession. And I think the more that you can look at them as being intertwined, is odd as that sounds, to think that the tax law and technology is intertwined, but it really is. And at the same time, going back to what's it all about? what drives me is helping people, kind of getting beyond the numbers on the page, and anything that can help to reduce that friction. I think is fantastic, and that's really what technology is doing, and that's what clients are expecting and wanting. I mean, you have that in other aspects of your life, right? I mean, you want a widget or something, I don't know, and you can literally go on your phone, look it up, and you can have it show up the next day, maybe even later that day, or the things that you have at your disposal, and the ease of being able to even electronically sign documents and things like that. You have it in other elements of your life, and that's the expectation from clients, right? That we have is, well, all of these advances are going to be incorporated into tax. So I look at that as an exciting development, but it's definitely the pace of it has sped up. I've gone through a number of software changes and platform changes and all that so far in my career, and I know there's many, many more to come. And I think that's just that's par for the course at this point in time. I think it's only going to continue forward, and we're going to just continue to see more of it. So embrace it, do what you can to get a leg up, and maybe even in an environment where you're maybe not going out as much as you normally would be able to, or dealing with the fact that classes are virtual perhaps, or whatever it might be, or maybe you weren't able to do an opportunity that you were planning on having, like an internship. If you're able to use that to kind of develop some of those skills, I think that will only help you in your career.
And again, it sounds to me from the way you've described it that technology is one of those major life forces that presents lots of opportunities for young people to differentiate themselves. Just like the tax changes presented that opportunity for me, the implementation of technology and the rapid deployment of new technology keeps people in a position where nothing's ever the same. And so if a young person decides they're going to stake their claim around some technology use or technology development that no one else is claiming, they could build their career around that as well, if I heard you correctly.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, when we have new people that are joining the team, and we have interns that come along, I mean, I'm actually kind of excited because I know that there are things I can learn from them, right? And so even as the new person on the block, you can be contributing to the team that you're joining, and like you said, make a name for yourself by doing that and demonstrating leadership in that way. So it can even be the simple stuff, the things that you think are just really simple, and gosh, everybody knows this. Don't take it for granted. I will say that even myself, I've had those moments of time of looking at it saying, gosh, I don't really know how this works. And then I think I have an experience right now where an intern was like, oh, you just, whatever it is, it's really easy. You don't know that. So I think, again, maybe going back to that learning mindset, it's something I think that comes into play here with the technology, but you're absolutely right. I mean, you can really make a name for yourself, make an impression especially in this environment by helping, and just jumping in whatever that means, technology or the Internal Revenue Code, right?
Yeah, I think the area of technology, the way you've described it, is spot on to what we're seeing with our move to online delivery of courses at DePaul. I think I mentioned earlier that DePaul is not unique in that many of our courses this past spring and now into the fall will be online. And what technology is providing is so many different ways for us to interact with the student that actually in some ways makes the class experience, I think, more rewarding for the student than perhaps the traditional in-class lectures might have been. I know that's perhaps a bit of controversy around that. I mean, I love the in-person classes, but technology, as you've described it, there's so many different ways that you can use it. You can use it to provide content like these podcasts. You can use it to engage one-on-one with students at a time and a place that's convenient for them. And the student can decide, does he or she want to turn on the camera or leave the camera off? But in any case, they're engaging with you in a way that may be more comfortable for them than if they had to meet with you in your office after class. you can make them part of a group. We've been using, as part of our class delivery, we've been using discussion boards where students can post questions either by name or anonymously, depending on their comfort with that, and get not only the answer from the instructor, but also perhaps get support and answers from other students. And so you create this community online that I'm not sure was as effective as the community that was being created in the classroom. And so I'm finding that because you have all these different ways of combining technology with content, that students are able to navigate. I teach undergraduate tax, to navigate those rules more successfully because you have so many more bites at the apple to learn what you need to learn in order to do well on the exams and on the papers that you have to submit.
It's really interesting, right? And it is, again, how you kind of look at the perspective, right? You can bemoan the loss of the in person, but also embrace kind of almost as much as it gave up. It maybe even more, to your point, it gives through this opportunity. But how did you make that shift? I mean, that is a pretty hard turn that you kind of had to make there to going online. And maybe what tips do you have for students in this environment to making the most of it?
Well, I think number one is again, we've used this concept in terms of what they could do if they were working. I think the same concept applies to the classroom experience or the learning experience. Is survey the landscape, see what the instructor is doing to try and help you understand the content, and then if that landscape is missing something, if there's a way that you want to learn or you feel better about learning the material, raise your hand and let the instructor know that, is there a way for me to get more information about this particular area? Is there a way for me to have more one-on-one time with you or with a tutor? The process is the same. Look at what you're getting, survey it, see where the gaps are, and then make suggestions on what to do. Case in point. So I had a summer class for a career class. And so one of the things that I try to do for my students is I try to find people like yourself, Damien, who are in the accounting profession one way or another, and I interview them for my class, and then I share those interviews with the student. Well, a student, Monday of like the third or fourth week of class, a student posted on the discussion board, wouldn't it be great if we could have somebody who has just had an internship experience talk to us about what that experience was like? I've never had an internship. I don't think some of my fellow students have had that internship. Is that possible? That was a post that the student made on Monday. On Tuesday, I sent an email out to several students that had just graduated from DePaul that I knew had internships over the last couple of years. And I asked if any of them would be open to doing an interview with me for my class. A few students raised their hand. I scheduled the interviews on Wednesday morning and I posted them by lunch Wednesday. So the students looked at all the content that I was offering and said, it would be great if we could have this too. And because of the use of technology, both in asking for the content and then in my delivering the content, I was able to give them information that I wouldn't, in this particular case, did not think put up in advance, right? And so to me, that is a perfect example of how the technology and the environment we're in is providing opportunities to have much more tailored content that is specific to the needs of the student to both understand the material and perhaps to delve outside of that area in a way that's helpful to them.
Yeah, and maybe I'll even share from we have a summer internship program, and we had 4 interns in our office here in Chicago that we got to work with, and we were really thinking, how are we going to do this virtually, and how are we going to make that experience, a win-win for everybody involved. And one of the things that our team had come up with was this idea of shadowing, and we had the 4 interns, and there's 4 tax partners here in our Chicago office, and we each got assigned an intern for a week, and we kind of did this rotation thing. And in any and all meeting that would be appropriate, and they were all Zoom and phone calls and the like, we invited them to. I will tell you that the feedback we got from the interns was great. But I will say, again, back to your point of the effectiveness, I feel like I got to know them so much better and get a better understanding of what they're looking for, and be able to offer some advice that's specific to them, because we were spending time on phone calls together or Zoom calls or whatever it might be, right? So I mean, I think it's a good example that you can really kind of, maybe the question to ask is, how can I make the best of it and really leverage the situation to get even more out of it?
Yeah, no, technology, I think if you're open minded about it, creates so many different opportunities like the ones you've mentioned. And because it's not fixed to a schedule the way other things certainly in the academic environment might be, it allows you to do more just in time learning, just in time activities that you weren't able to do otherwise. And I think your own experience inviting them into these meetings, you might not have been able to do that had they been live meetings, right?
Right. And just the logistics of all that, and it's definitely something that I'm walking away from this thinking, wow, I need to do this more often and more frequently for those that I work with, because it's a great way to be able to again get to know the person you're working with, but also from a learning perspective, because a lot of it is you learn the words on the page, and so much of even the experience that you're encouraging through your classes with that interaction, it's learning by applying it and living in it. And so I think a lot of that, it kind of opens up a lot of doors to that, and maybe not being shy to turn on the camera sometimes, and stick around for extra sessions and things like that. It's definitely an interesting world that we're in, but perhaps, like you said, there's definitely some lemonade that you can make out of the lemons, I guess, if you want to use that metaphor.
My wish for the fall as we continue in an online environment is that the students see the opportunity they have to ask for the things that they need to be successful, because I think in this environment, not only do we have the tools to support them, but we also have professors and instructors, not just at DePaul, but in the academic community generally, that want students to be successful despite all this, right? And so most requests that I've seen of a student have gone not only answered, but have been answered with a high degree of enthusiasm.
So I guess maybe kind of looking big picture here, is what advice, what wisdom would you give to students that are just starting out in the profession, or looking to have a successful career in tax?
I'll put it in current tense because obviously the COVID situation has created perhaps some stress on that. If I could answer that question from that perspective, I have a few layers to add. So certainly all the things that I would tell a student to do in normal times still apply. The idea of constantly updating your resume, making sure that you're looking for opportunities to differentiate yourself in the things that you're doing, either on campus or through the work and volunteer opportunities you have outside of campus. You keep your resume strong, keep looking for things that you can do to elevate the skill set that you can bring to an employer. That's a traditional rule that continues to apply. The second traditional rule that continues to apply is to continue to look for opportunities to networking events. I know many of the universities and certainly state societies and other firms like BKD and other firms are hosting lots of virtual events for students to interact with the profession and interact with other professionals. Certainly those networking events, you should continue to sign up for those. So those kind of the bread and butter of what you should do as a student who's trying to land a career opportunity or an internship opportunity. But I think in this environment, some of the things that you have to also focus on is that looking for mentors is not going to be as easy as it might have been in terms of walking down the hall at the company you're working at, or walking down the hall of your university and being able to step into somebody's office and have a conversation around your strategy or what you're going to do next. That is not going to be something that just happens naturally the way it might have been in the past. And so I would say that people have to be thoughtful about looking for opportunities to find those mentorship situations, using LinkedIn, for example, to find people that may have graduated from your school or may be working at a company that you're interested in learning more about, or maybe an alum of the university. Having the courage to reach out to people to try and have one-on-one discussions with them that may lead to a mentorship type experience is certainly something that might have not been top of mind a year ago, but now I think needs to be part of that day-to-day effort at building your network. Casting a wider net in terms of looking, not just applying at a few firms or a few organizations, but applying at a broad number. Because I think if you have an accounting degree or you're in the process of getting an accounting degree, there's going to be a role for you. I'm convinced that there's going to be a continued demand for someone with those skills, but it may just be that the demand is not going to be as apparent. It may take a while for you to find the opportunity that makes the most sense for you. And so applying at more organizations is going to be key to that, not just the ones that list opportunities on campus, but also going onto different external platforms to do that as well. And then lastly, hone your virtual interviewing skills. So as you pointed out, with the interns being on Zoom calls with you, I think that over the next 6 to 12 months, I would think most all interviews are going to be done virtually. I don't see that there's going to be many in-person interviews. And so taking the time to get feedback on how you do in a virtual interview would be helpful. I know all the universities that I've talked to have opportunities for you to record your interview and have that critiqued by somebody at the Career Center or by somebody who's trained to do that. What they're looking for is not just how you answer the questions and the content of your answers, but they also look for how do you appear on camera? Is your lighting the right lighting? Do you have a strong internet connection? Is the sound coming through good? If you're doing the Zoom interview from your bedroom, have you made your bed, or do you have a decent background? All those things that leave impressions on the future employer. Those are things that we wouldn't have thought of in the past, right? In the past, you showed up at an interview, you put on a suit or the equivalent of a suit, and you've practiced how you're going to respond to the questions. But the virtual interview creates so many other opportunities for somebody to evaluate you as a candidate, and you just need to be conscious of how you're doing that. So those would be the things that I would suggest in today's environment. But I would say, having said all that, I am convinced that the demand for accounting majors will continue to be strong. There might be a little bit of an ebb in this next 6-month period, but just as you're doing, BKD's doing, all the firms that we're talking to are trying to continue to fill their pipeline because they know business will swing around and things will be back to normal before we know it.
There definitely is that constant, particularly in the tax realm, change, like we were talking about in the new tax legislation, and that continues to move forward. And there's definitely a need to help people understand it, apply it, creates again new opportunities. And I think maybe even staying up on that and paying attention to kind of what's happening in the current scene is helpful to that end as well. But your advice about kind of preparing for and being ready for those Zoom interviews, it's so important. I think that's fantastic advice, because it takes a lot more effort to do, and it's kind of like the adage in sports, right? That you're going to play like you practice, and you really do have to practice on those things. It doesn't necessarily just come naturally and almost just go into it knowing that. It's sometimes hard to slow down, and again, seems like it would be so easy. I could just wing this, no big deal. Maybe you can wing it, but to your point, there's going to be something that didn't quite go the way that it possibly could have if you put a little bit of advanced preparation and thought into it. And I think it speaks volumes of the kind of work that you do, even though it's not direct, right, to the technical knowledge or whatever. It shows the attention to detail that you have, and that's a really, really great way to demonstrate it.
I think it's no different than any skill set. The more you practice, the more it becomes kind of muscle memory in terms of how you go about answering the questions, making eye contact, appearing on camera. I think so many of the students have had some experience with in-person interviews. Many of them have had some type of job that required an interview. So they're used to that, right? But now we're quickly shifting to an environment where they're being interviewed in a way that they're not used to being interviewed. And so if you don't kind of work out the bugs ahead of time, that could come through in an interview where you're really trying to make your best impression. And you don't want that to be the reason why your interview is discounted in any way.
I know from going through it, although I always try to encourage this when I'm the person sitting on the other side of the table, giving an interview, to just relax and be yourself. I mean, I think that's the advice I was always given, but oh my gosh, sometimes your anxieties and the fear in the moment and the nervousness can definitely sneak in there. And I mean, it's biological, right? That once you start having those kind of fight or flight responses, your brain doesn't operate the same way, just from a basic level. And so you kind of want to have those things dialed in and not leaving things to chance. Like, gosh, hey, did I make the bed in the background? Or, is the camera pointing up at the ceiling or am I facing a window and I have the window behind me so they can't even really see my face, or, all the different things. And there's a lot of really great articles and things that you can find out there, YouTube videos, whatever, to figure out how to do it. But, taking the time to do that, it does go a long, long way, and it gives you one less thing to think about. So at the end of the day, you can just kind of be yourself, kind of embrace that.
Again, looking at this from making lemonade from lemons, right? Getting back to the networking thing that I mentioned, the good news is that because so many accounting professionals and tax professionals like you and I are working virtually, the opportunity to engage with those individuals as potential mentors or coaches, I think people are much more accessible in this environment than they might have been if you had to schedule an in-person meeting at their office. I know that students who are reaching out to folks on LinkedIn or through we have also DePaul has its own alumni platform. They're getting many more positive responses to meeting by phone or meeting by Zoom or FaceTime than they might have if they were trying to have an in-person meeting somewhere. So I would encourage students in this environment to take advantage of that accessibility that professionals have and reach out to folks that you think can be helpful to you in one way or another.
One I'll add to that list that's been helpful to me and I enjoy participating in, and even right now learn a lot from, is using the Twitter platform. There's a hashtag tax Twitter, and there's a lot of really great tax knowledge that's kind of shared under the tax Twitter handle there. I'd say, as with anything, obviously, you have to kind of do a little vetting as to the information that's coming out there, right? Anything you read online is not the same thing as reading it in the Internal Revenue Code, we'll just say. But to that end, the group there is always happy to help. And that's maybe another avenue for students and those kind of starting out in the career to build that sense of community, even in a virtual environment, and continue to learn and ask questions of, how'd you do this and where'd you go? I mean, yeah, thinking of it, I know myself personally, I like answering those questions and offering my experience, and I always try to say that this is what worked for me. I don't know if it's going to work for you, but at least you're able to learn from that perhaps. And there'll be something in there that'd be a takeaway that you can apply in your own personal situation as it fits for you. Well, this is a great conversation. I have to say, I mean, I feel like it's already highlighted that, clearly passion and enjoy helping people understand seriously considering a career in tax. I think it's something that I found a lot of enjoyment from. I enjoy my career. I enjoy what I do and consider myself lucky for that. It's just great to talk to another person that's doing the same thing and obviously influencing so many people in terms of their career choices and where that might go. So thank you.
Well, no, and thank you, Damien. I think, as I said, the reason why I've been so excited about what you're doing is that through this environment, through the podcast environment that you've created, you've presented an opportunity for people to tell their individual stories in such a unique way that, to me, it just amplifies the opportunities that are available to somebody that wants to build a career in this area. So thank you for doing what you're doing as well.
So what'd you think? And what questions do you have? I really do want to know, and I take your feedback to heart to shape the podcast. For example, and this is one I've been working on since we received it in January, Nilda Ayala wrote a rating on Apple Podcasts to say, "I really like the content you have. However, it's really hard to understand you." please slow down when you speak. So, I've been trying to slow it down a bit, though I'll admit, I do find myself speeding up when I get really excited about something. Of course, you can also drop us an email at simplytax@bkd.com or connect with me on social media. Find out how to connect with me, get additional resources like links to some of the items that we discussed during the conversation today, and learn more about Kent Klaus in the show notes of this episode, which are available at bkd.com/simplytax. I'm Damien Martin, and thank you for listening.
The information contained in this episode of Simply Tax is based on data available as of the date of its release. BKD is under no obligation to update this information if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances. Any information provided is not to be considered as tax, legal, or financial advice. Please consult your tax advisor before acting on any matters covered.